In the heart of Africa, on a sacred mountain wrapped in mist, there once stood a kingdom the world chose to forget. It had its own money, its own courts, its own ambassadors, men who crossed entire oceans to kneel before the Pope himself. This was no scattering of villages. This was an empire of stone and law, older than the voyages that would one day betray it. For 300 years it shaped the destiny of Central Africa, and then it vanished, buried beneath a lie we are still told today. How does a kingdom this powerful simply disappear? Who decided its story should never be heard? Before we go deeper, subscribe and turn on notifications because this channel resurrects the empire's history tried to bury. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and tap like to help this forgotten story reach the world. Because by the end of this video, you will discover the betrayal that destroyed a Christian African king. A secret his own trusted allies tried to erase forever. This is the Kingdom of Kongo. Long before European sails ever scarred the horizon, there was a warrior whose name still echoes through the red soil of Central Africa. His name was Lukini Luanimi. The year was around 1390. He was young, ambitious, and haunted by a hunger no village could satisfy, the hunger to build something that would outlive him. South of the Great Congo River, the land was a patchwork of small chiefdoms, each ruled by its own lord, each suspicious of the next. Lukini looked at this fractured world and saw not chaos, but opportunity. He gathered warriors. He forged alliances through marriage and blood. And then he turned his eyes toward a mountain, a flat-topped peak rising from the plains like a throne carved by the gods themselves. On its summit lived the people of Mbwila, who believed their high ground made them untouchable. They were wrong. Lukini climbed, and when the dust settled, the mountain was his. He renamed it Mbanza Kongo, the city of the Congo. But here is what made Lukini different from every conqueror before him. He did not rule by the spear alone. He built a system. He divided his growing kingdom into provinces, and over each he placed a governor who answered to him alone. He created a royal court with titles, advisors, and laws. Imagine it, while much of the world still bowed to scattered warlords, a man on an African mountaintop was assembling a centralized state, with a capital, a hierarchy, and a vision. The kingdom grew. Villages became towns. Towns became provinces. Trade routes stretched like veins across the land, carrying copper, cloth, ivory, and salt. And at the center of it all sat the Mbwila Kongo, the king, a ruler whose word could lift a man into nobility or cast him into exile. Beneath him stretched a web of nobles and title holders, each bound to the crown by duty and ambition, each quietly dreaming of rising higher. It was a court alive with whispers, loyalty, and rivalry, the living machinery of a true state. Caravans moved between distant provinces under the king's protection, and at every crossroads his authority was felt. Yet a kingdom is only as strong as the secret that holds it together. And the Congo had one. A source of wealth so strange, so precisely controlled, that it would make its kings some of the richest men in Africa, and plant the seed of everything that would later be stolen from them. What was this hidden treasure? The answer was waiting at the bottom of the sea. The treasure was not gold. It was not diamonds. It was something so small you could hold a fortune in the palm of your hand. Off the coast, near the island of Luanda, the warm Atlantic waters hid a tiny sea snail, the nzimbu. Its delicate shell, no larger than a fingernail, was gathered by divers who plunged again and again into the shallows, filling baskets with what the Congo people used as money. This was currency, real, standardized currency, centuries before many European nations had organized their own. And the genius of it lay in control. Only the king could authorize the harvest. The royal household decided how many shells entered the kingdom each year. In a single stroke, the Mbwila Kongo had done what modern central banks do today. He controlled the money supply itself. The values were exact. 100 nzimbu could buy you a hen. 300 a garden hoe. 2,000 shells? And a goat was yours. Markets buzzed across the kingdom. Merchants counting shells with practiced fingers. Families saving them. Nobles hoarding them. An entire economy pulsed to the rhythm of the tide. But money was only one pillar of Congo's astonishing order. there was also justice. The kingdom had courts, real courts, where disputes were heard, where elders and appointed judges weighed evidence, where even a commoner could bring a grievance and expect to be heard. Punishments were measured. Appeals could climb all the way to the king's own court at Mbanza Kongo. This was not the lawless wilderness that later storytellers would invent. This was a society of rules, of records, of rights. The strangers who would soon arrive from across the sea were stunned. They had been told Africa was empty of civilization. Instead they found a capital city, a royal palace, a court of nobles draped in fine cloth, and a king who governed a vast realm through law and trade. They could scarcely believe their eyes. And that disbelief, that collision between what Europe expected and what Congo truly was, would soon change everything. Because far across the ocean, sails were already being raised. A new kind of stranger was coming. And the day they landed on Congo's shores, the kingdom would face a choice that would echo for 500 years. The strangers carried gifts in one hand, and in the other, they carried chains. In 1483, a Portuguese explorer named Diogo Chao guided his ships to the mouth of the mighty Congo River. For the Congo people watching from the banks, these pale men in floating wooden fortresses must have seemed like beings from another world. But the Congo did not panic, and they did not bow. They were a confident kingdom at the height of its power, and they met the strangers as equals. What followed was one of the most remarkable diplomatic experiments in all of history. The Congo king welcomed the Portuguese. He sent young Congolese nobles across the sea to Lisbon to learn their language, their writing, their faith. In return, priests, craftsmen, and books flowed into Mbanza Kongo. Then, in 1491, the king himself accepted baptism. But the true transformation came with his son, a man whose name would become legend. Born Vemba Nzinga, he took the Christian name Afonso. And Afonso believed, not as a puppet, not as a man bullied into a foreign god. He embraced Christianity with the fire of a true convert and the mind of a brilliant statesman. He raised churches of stone. He learned to read and write in Portuguese. He wrote to the kings of Portugal as a brother monarch and called the Pope his spiritual father. Under Afonso, Mbanza Kongo became known as São Salvador. Schools rose. A new African Christian kingdom took shape, proud, literate, and recognized across Europe. Congolese students mastered foreign tongues. Letters in elegant script traveled between two royal courts an ocean apart. Visitors wrote home in astonishment at the dignity and order of this Christian kingdom on the edge of a world they thought they already knew. For one brief, shining moment, it seemed the meeting of two worlds might create something extraordinary. A true partnership of equals across the ocean. Afonso dreamed of it. He poured his entire life into it. But Afonso did not yet understand the real appetite of his European allies. They had not crossed the sea for souls, or for friendship, or for faith. They had come for something else, something that walked on two legs and could be sold. And slowly, quietly, beneath the prayers and the polished diplomacy, a darkness began to spread through Afonso's beloved kingdom. By the time he finally understood what was happening, it was already devouring his people. And the letters he would write next will break your heart. At first, it came as a trickle. A few captives sold here, a few prisoners traded there. But the Portuguese hunger for enslaved labor, for their plantations, their colonies, their swelling empire, was bottomless. And Congo, with its large population and its sprawling trade networks, sat directly in the path of that hunger. Portuguese merchants began buying human beings. Then they began encouraging Congolese to raid their own neighbors for more. The trickle became a river. The river became a flood. Cities emptied. Families were torn apart in the night. Mothers woke to find their children gone, marched in chains toward the coast and the waiting ships. And Afonso, the Christian king, the man who had given his heart to this alliance, watched in horror as the very partners he trusted bled his kingdom dry. So he did something extraordinary. He picked up his pen. In a series of letters to the King of Portugal, Afonso pleaded. He wrote that the slave traders were corrupting his nobles, emptying his land, seizing even men of free birth and noble blood. It was his will, he declared, that in his kingdoms there should be no trade in slaves, no market for human beings at all. He begged for doctors and teachers, and was sent merchants and chains instead. He wrote not as a beggar, but as a king defending his people. Letter after letter, year after year, he set down the crime unfolding around him in his own careful hand, certain that surely, surely, his Christian brothers would listen. And how did Europe answer? With silence, with excuses, with more ships. The profits were simply too vast. The Portuguese crown wanted the trade to continue, and the men on the ground ignored Afonso's authority entirely. The Christian brotherhood he had believed in was a one-way road. They had wanted his souls for the church and his people for the markets, and when forced to choose, they chose the markets every time. Afonso died around 1542, an old man who had watched his dream curdle into a nightmare. But his kingdom did not die with him. For generations more, Congo would fight to be seen, to be respected, to be treated as the sovereign nation it truly was. And in that struggle, one man would attempt the impossible. A journey so bold it would carry an African ambassador across the entire known world. To kneel before the most powerful spiritual leader on earth. He would either save his kingdom's dignity or die trying. His name was Antonio Emanuele Ne Vunda, and in the year 1604, his king, Alvaro II, entrusted him with a mission unlike any in the history of his people. He was to travel from the African interior across the Atlantic, through the courts of Brazil and Spain, all the way to Rome, to stand before the Pope himself as the ambassador of the Kingdom of Kongo. Think about what that meant. An African diplomat representing a sovereign African Christian kingdom, sent to negotiate directly with the Vatican, to ask for missionaries loyal to Congo, for a bishop of their own, for the recognition that would finally free them from the suffocating grip of Portuguese middlemen. It was a breathtaking act of statecraft, but the journey itself became a nightmare. Ne Vunda crossed the oceans aboard Portuguese ships, and the Portuguese had no interest in seeing Congo speak directly to Rome. There were delays, there were detours, there were mysterious obstacles at every turn. Years slipped away. The ambassador, worn down by the brutal voyage and the endless waiting, grew sick. And still he pressed on, carried by duty alone, refusing to turn back. Finally, in January of 1608, after years of struggle, the gates of Rome opened before him. The eternal city, the beating heart of the Christian world, the destination he had crossed the planet to reach. But Antonio Ne Vunda was dying. He had arrived too late, or perhaps, some quietly whispered, he had been delayed just long enough. The Pope, moved by the ambassador's devotion, ordered him carried into the papal apartments and came to his bedside himself. But there was nothing to be done. Just 2 days after reaching Rome, Antonio Emanuele Ne Vunda, the first ambassador from the heart of Africa to the Vatican, died. The Pope was so struck by his story that he ordered a marble monument carved in his honor. It still stands in Rome today, the face of an African envoy gazing out across the centuries. But ask yourself this, was it truly only illness that killed him? A man carrying a message that powerful interests desperately wanted silenced, delayed for years on ships he did not command, dying at the very instant he might finally be heard? The Congo had reached for the world, and the world had let their messenger die on its doorstep. The kingdom's greatest diplomatic gamble was over, and the worst was still to come. By the middle of the 1600s, the Kingdom of Kongo was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. The endless drain of the slave trade had hollowed out its villages. Ambitious nobles turned on one another, fighting for the throne. And a new European power, now hungry for the same rich coast, circled like a predator that senses weakness. The tension had been building for generations. It would all come crashing down on a single terrible day. The year was 1665. At a place called Mbwila, the Congo army assembled beneath its king, Antonio I. They came in their thousands, proud warriors, noble horsemen, the gathered strength of a kingdom determined to prove it was not yet broken. Banners rose against the sky, drums shook the earth. The king himself stood among them, crowned and resolute, ready to defend everything his ancestors had built since Lucchini first climbed that sacred mountain 3 centuries before. Across the field waited a smaller but better armed European force and its local allies, their firearms gleaming in the African sun. What happened that day would decide the fate of an entire civilization. The clash was ferocious. Dust and smoke swallowed the field. The air filled with the thunder of guns and the cries of men. The Congo fought with everything they had, but the tide turned against them. By the time the smoke finally cleared, the unthinkable had happened. King Antonio I lay among the fallen. The kingdom's sacred banners were captured. The heart of Congo's army was shattered in a single afternoon. The news spread like wildfire, and with it came despair. For 300 years, the Mbwila Congo had been the unbroken thread holding the kingdom together. Now that thread was cut. What followed was not a clean conquest. It was something slower and far sadder. Civil war, fragmentation, rival nobles carving the once great kingdom into feuding pieces. The capital, Sao Salvador, would eventually be abandoned, its great stone churches left to crumble into the swallowing forest. The currency, the courts, the ambassadors, the proud diplomacy with Rome, all of it faded into memory. And then came the final cruelty. The world simply decided to forget that any of it had ever existed. But the Congo did not truly vanish. Its people endured. Its blood scattered across continents in the holds of slave ships, carrying the memory of a lost kingdom into new worlds. And today, that buried truth is rising again, like a mountain emerging from the mist. The Kingdom of Kongo was not a myth. It was not a footnote. It was a sovereign African nation with its own money, its own courts, and its own ambassadors. A kingdom that spoke to popes and kings as an equal, and fought to protect its people from one of history's greatest crimes. Its tragedy was not that it was primitive. Its tragedy was that it trusted and believed in a brotherhood that was never truly offered in return. And in that betrayal burns a lesson that still matters today. The powerful will rewrite the story of those they destroy, unless we refuse to let them. So remember the mountain. Remember the shells that were money. Remember the ambassador who crossed the world and died at its very heart. Remember a Christian king who begged the world to spare his people, and was answered with silence. If this story moved you, subscribe, because there are countless lost kingdoms still waiting to be remembered. Tell me in the comments, did you know Africa had a kingdom like this? And when you are ready for more forgotten history, click the video glowing on your screen right now. The empires were real. The story was buried, and we are digging it back up.